and I go sideways up the road, and then it starts switching from side to side, and I'd lost feeling of where I was counter steering. And I'd read in a racing book that if in circumstances like that, you let go of the steering wheel, the Ackerman in the steering would send it straight. And that's what happened. I let go of the wheel and it went straight. And I got back into the pits. Siffert fell on the floor laughing. I said, what's the matter with you? He said, Brian, you're the color of your overalls.
Following up on a recent IG Live discussion we had back in May, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Porsche's win at the Targa Florio with one of the racing greats who made that possible, talking about Mr. Brian Redman, of course. Cam?
Of course. I mean, what a treat. Here we are. Was that our second show on Instagram Live? And now we're interviewing the gentleman who actually won the race in 1970 with his co-driver, Jo Siffert. And what a treat to be here today and be talking about one of my favorite topics, the Targa.
Yeah, I know. It's such a cool deal. And of course, in 1924, Mercedes won the race with a compressor racing car, but the designer was Ferdinand Porsche. So the first German victory in the legendary Targa Florio became a national event. Yet the secret victor of the Targa Florio in 1924 was in fact Ferdinand Porsche. His great moment came after the race, where the technical school in Stuttgart acknowledged his design achievement for the victorious Mercedes by awarding him an honorary doctorate in engineering. And 6 years later, university dignitaries were reading this regularly in the name of the company, Dr. INGHCF Porsche, yes. GmbH. Cool fact.
How did you covered that so well? That was well done, sir.
I make notes.
I think, the funny thing when we go to Rennsport or any Porsche Luftgekühlt event and we see anybody wearing Targa Florio merchandise or T-shirts that celebrate the race, and I think it's become such an icon in so many ways, but people have often forgotten just how intense and grueling this race really was. I mean, by 1970, this is the oldest motorsports event in the world. It even precedes Indy 500, and of course the Isle of Man TT precedes those events. And by 1970, it's the short course, so it's the 45-mile course, not the 67 or the 92-mile course. But even so, they go through 5 villages, 5 towns in Sicily. And Vic Elford's gone on record many times talking about, of course, we all know Ferrari, Tifosi, and motorsports fans, Italian fans, Tifosi, how crazy they are. And he's often gone on record and say, like, you take the Sicilians and it's like you up the ante. It's like a whole nother level of Tifosi and excitement and passion. And, a grueling event, 45 laps, 45 miles, 11 laps, so close to 500 miles, and 2,000 feet of elevation change. That's double Nürburgring. So just absolutely really intense and real gusto stuff. I mean, real mental toughness, physical challenge, an incredible race of all races.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just, what you're describing, how insane it looks when you see a modern Formula One car today on the tracks, in the street, actually, at Monaco.
Yes.
And, the Targa started out the same way as you pointed out, 1906, the world's oldest race, and still going on at this point in 1970. And, the cars continued to evolve, but the streets really didn't. I mean, They were,
those practice, and I implore anyone after they watch this session with Brian Redman to Google YouTube, Targa de Florio, and just practice Vic Elford or Brian Redman or street scene or practice. And those scenes of driving 911 test cars, doing testing. And again, these were open roads. They were driving through 5 different cities, and there was no bales. It's not a race course. This is one of the last world's greatest road races as well during that time period. And just absolutely mind-boggling. There's people crossing the streets. There's people having nice spaghetti dinners, lunch and drinking some vino. And here's a 908 Spider just blasting right down the street. And
man, yeah, for sure. And I mean, as great as the 400,000 spectators that lined the 45 miles or so of the circuit, were these drivers of this era were as tough as nails. I mean, I'm thrilled through my work at Brumos and Porsche over the years to get to know some of these legends like Brian and Vic Elford and Gerard LaRousse. I mean, Vic talked about threading the needle through the spectators, lining the circuit portions. I mean, certain portions of it. It's just amazing. And even Brian's book opens up, with the stats that from 1965 to 1975, 1 in 3 top-level WSC drivers would lose their life in a racing accident. I mean, it was just unacceptable, obviously, and that eventually would fortunately change. But boy, getting close to them, the cars and the drivers, I mean, it's just such an amazing that this was still going on into the early 70s. Well,
and really, when you look at the Targa, it is really a rally. I mean, it really is 800 corners in one lap. So that's what's a statistic is like 16 to 20 turns in 1 mile average. So that's an average in a mile. You're going to turn 16 to 20 times. It's nearly impossible to try to think that you're going to learn the course. Again, 45 miles of 800 turns. And so as Brian said, we'll hopefully talk about, how do you even tackle that? How do you even approach a race where there's no way you're going to memorize? Now, Vic Elford said you could put him anywhere in that course, drop him down from a helicopter, and he would know exactly where he is. And I don't doubt it. I mean, Vic does have a photographic memory.
He does.
But for the common race car driver, it just Herculean feat. I mean, just incredible event.
Yeah. And these cars they were doing this in, I mean, obviously when Porsche started doing it, they had the 550 Spiders, the 718s, the RSKs. They made the two, I'm going to mispronounce this because it's German, but the 356B, the 2000 GS CGT that they made, the Dreichenschrauber, did I say that right?
The paint scraper. Well, in English, it's called the paint scraper.
The scraper, yeah. There was, the car from the 1963 history, the winner, they made 2 of them. We had one at the Heritage Gallery in Atlanta once, and of course, followed up with the 904 and the 906.
Right.
We've got Bobby Rahal's 906 in the Heritage Gallery right now. And, that car, its first race was the Targa Florio. It was bought by a Sicilian family so that their son purposely could take it to the Targa Florio and run it, finished 8th overall with that car in 1966.
Yeah. Well, the Targa is synonymous with Porsche. They've won it 11 times. They still hold the record over Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, much to the chagrin of any Italian. But the Targa is so pivotal in Porsche history because, as you said, when you think about their first major overall victory came in 1956 within the brand new 558 Spider. And that was a team effort with von Honstein and an Italian gentleman named Umbruto. And they drive down there in the car. It's just unfathomable to think about the race support they had. They had 2 mechanics, 1 car, and they ended up winning in 56. And obviously the Targa, again, so synonymous with Porsche, the brand, and rightfully so. It's one of the most grueling, toughest races that anyone could ever imagine tackling. And again, I want to go to Sicily one day. And I've joked about this, but can you imagine? I would love to drive those roads. I love Italian food. My father says there's 2 kind of people in the world. There's Italians and then people who want to be Italians like myself. But just the romance of the race, and then obviously the circuit is just mind-boggling.
Without a doubt, I'm right there with you on that. We get to 1970, of course, and there's so much going on. I look forward to talking to Brian about this. But the car that Porsche produces for this, they make the 9083 just for 2 races. In fact, at the end of the day, they wind up entering it in 4 races. It wins 3 out of the 4, the Targa Florio 1970 being one of them. But I mean, this is the car. This is the car built for the Targa Florio.
Yeah, just weighing under 1,200 pounds. And think about the tension, too, setting up the dynamics of 1970 and the team dynamics, because it's pretty much known that Ferdinand Piech and John Ryer, who owns the Ryer sports team, they don't get along. They often are having differences of opinion. And that's why we say Ferdinand Piech brought that extra 917 to the race. And of course, Vic Elford does the classic practice lap and has the 5th fastest lap in practice in a 9:17. Of course, he couldn't get out of the car because he was so exhausted and mentally spent from driving the car. But can you imagine on those roads that are barely 2 lanes, most of them are 1 lane, driving a 9:17 full out? I mean, mind-boggling to think about, but he wanted to prove a point to John Ryer, with the 908.3s. And of course, you had that scenario, and then you had the One Works Factory 908.3 there as well with Hans Hermann and Vic Elford against the John Ryer team. So pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it was, and man, that's why today's conversation is going to be so inspiring, without a doubt. In fact, speaking of inspiring, I mean, this passion for the Targa Florio, it inspired Porsche to name a car after it. I mean, the 911 Targa, this is, of course, where that comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Targa, again, I love that Porsche has given all these wonderful references to prior races that they've done well and have an important piece of motorsports history. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Nino Vaccarella. He was the arch nemesis in the Porsche story. He's there in the lone Ferrari 512S, the only factory works. And it's a fascinating story. This guy is Sicilian. He lives there on the island, and he's a school teacher. And he's driving the Ferrari. And, if you watched any of these videos, there's all these great paintings on the roads and on buildings that says Forza Nino. Yeah. I mean, obviously the Tifosi were going crazy for Nino. And I just think what an incredible story in motorsports, a school teacher that's driving a factory 512S Ferrari. So I just love the romance of all of this.
This is going to be a great conversation, no doubt about it. And of course, going back to 1970, 50 years ago, at that point in time, the 911 was only a 7-year-old model at that point.
That's right.
And, Porsche's getting ready themselves to launch the 914 model. They were going to take everything they'd learned from motorsports application with the mid-engine cars, up to that point in time, and basically the 904s, 906s, 908s. And here, for the first time, someone was going to be able to buy that mid-engine configuration and drive it on the street. And so it had to have been an exciting time.
Had to be. I mean, the factory, all pun included, was literally hitting on all cylinders at that point. So I'm so excited today. I mean, Brian Redman, what a treat to get to interview him and be with him. And he has the best imitations of accents.
Yes, he does.
Hands down. So we're going to get to hear some great German imitation accents. It's going to be wonderful.
I'm looking forward to that for sure. Well, what does learning about all this inspire in you, Cam?
When you really read about these historic races like you and I have been talking about since we've been doing the show together, and particularly the Targa, it's really inspiring that these teams, these personalities would persevere in circumstances that were incredibly tough. And I think it's a reminder, again, of the human spirit, of the human condition, of triumph over diversity in difficult situations. And how can it not be inspiring to, when you're working, in our case, in the shop, we're working long days, and, the reward is worth the effort, in other words. So it's just really inspiring to revisit these themes of human connectivity, of triumph, and the thing that brings us all together, Porsche.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the personalities behind him, like Brian Redman. What a gentleman. How about you, Ray?
Yeah, thank you. No, it's like you said, it inspires me to want to visit the course and trace the steps there in a modern Porsche, of course. I think that'd be the greatest thing to do. But, even greater respect for me is gained, like you say, for those who competed there.
Yeah.
I mean, it proves once again that you should do more than just go out and meet your heroes. You should really get to know your heroes. So let's do that. Let's get with Brian Redman, and let's do that now. As I mentioned, we're following up on a recent Instagram live discussion that we did celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Targa Florio win in 1970 with one of the racing greats who made that possible, Mr. Brian Redman. Brian, thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you, Ray. Always a pleasure to talk about Porsche.
Oh, wow.
We're here.
This is surreal. Brian, this is very surreal because as Ray and I have started this program, of course, the anniversary of the Targa Florio win came up, and we just had this conversation after that Instagram live show and said, wow, wouldn't it be incredible if we actually were able to get Mr. Redman on the show? And what an honor to have you here with us. I mean, this is truly 360 for us. So what a pleasure and honor.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, you know, we have so much. When we first started doing this, we thought, let's take an hour and we'll speak with our guest. And we realized quickly that an hour just isn't enough to go into these deep tracks. I mean, and then when you talk about someone like yourself, when you consider everything, I mean, major race wins and some of the most legendary sports cars like the Ford GT40 and the Porsche 917 and the Ferrari 312s on some of the world's greatest racetracks like Spa, Daytona, the Nürburgring, and of course, today's topic, the Targa Florio in Sicily. I mean, there's that. And then, of course, there's the matter of the 1970 South African Springbok Championship in a Chevron B16, not to mention three-time Formula 5000 champion, also credited with setting the course of IMSA GT history by inventing the modern GTP concept with the Cook Woods Loyalty 600.
Yes, yes.
And, of course, you managed to win that championship in 1981. Not to mention race wins with Group 44 and Jaguar, membership in the Motorsports Hall of Fame. And of course, one of our previous guests, Bobby Rahal, boy, he just went on and on about how thrilled he was to race side by side with you in the same car and of course, win Daytona in 1981.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Of course, you know, going back to 81, when we introduced the Lola T600 GTP, it was because IMSA, John Bishop, was trying to break Porsche domination.
Yeah.
That's what it was all about. You know, Porsche had won every race for 4 years except for one, the BMW won. So anyway, that's another story.
I just want to know, Brian, after hearing that impressive resume and just a little bit of your portfolio of work, when the movie's coming out? Because I would love to see the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
it would be an epic movie. I would watch all 3 hours or 4 hours of that epic saga. That'd be great.
I mean, there's enough there for a mini series, I think. I don't think you could do that in 3 or 4 hours.
No.
Well, so Brian, obviously we'd love to deep dive into the Targa. So why don't you give us a little bit of the circumstances lead us into what was happening in 1970 with the John Ryer efforts and the Golf Course 908 Spider program?
Well, just going back, very briefly, I started racing in 1959 in a Morris 1000 Travelers car. I made mop heads, the things you clean the floors with. I put a supercharger on it, harder brake linings, and raced it at the weekend. So that's how it started. And that went on for several years. But in 1967, so 8 years later, a friend of mine said, "Do you want to turn professional?" And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means I'll pay you 30 quid a week." That was about $50 a week, guaranteed for a year with a car and a mechanic. And that's how I turned professional. I was 67. And in September of 67, I did a race at Montlhéry, Paris, 1,000 kilometers, driving for David Piper in his 250 LM Ferrari with a co-driver, Richard Atwood, who went on to win Le Mans for Porsche in 1970. But at that race, after the race, it was very wet, conditions were terrible, but this tall gentleman came up to me and he said, "Redman, would you like to drive with X in the Kyalami 9-hour race in November?" And X and I won in the Gulf Mirage, which was the GT40. And I signed a contract with John Wyatt Gulf Porsche Racing for 1968. At the same time, the Cooper Car Company came along, Formula One. So now I'm doing Formula One and sports cars. And the sports car drive with Wyatt was the best in the world. And X and I won the Brands Hatch 6 hours and the Spa 1,000 kilometers. And I finished third in the Spanish Grand Prix in the Cooper in my second Formula One race. And the next Formula One race, Spa-Francorchamps, back again now, the suspension broke. I had an enormous accident and I almost removed my right arm. My right arm got trapped between the car and the barrier. I lost 3 wheels, it caught fire, and it was a mess. And when the head of surgery at the University of Liège Teaching Hospital, Professor Orban, got me on the table, he says, "Monsieur Redman, it may not be possible to save the arm." I smiled. I said, "Thank you, Professor." He said, "Why are you smiling?" I said, "Because I'm here." So, here I am. I've gone through 9 years of racing and I've only just got to the top in 68. And so suddenly I'm injured. I'm out of racing till September. when the local hospital said my arm was okay, I went to Africa to do the Springbok series, which was about 6 races. Kyle Army 9 hours, Cape Town 3 hours, Lorenzo Marks 3 hours, Rhodesia 3 hours, My arm was hurting a bit after these races. I saw a South African bone surgeon. I said, I've just signed a contract with Porsche and I have to be at Daytona in 6 weeks' time. And he said, I'll try an experiment that may work and it may not. And he opened my arm up from my wrist to my elbow, cleaned off the broken ends, took bone out of my hip and glued it in position and didn't put it in plaster. He said, don't use it till you have to. I arrived at Daytona at the end of January, 5 908 long tails. I met all the Porsche people, Rico Steinemann for the first time. And I was driving with Vic Elford, and I think Vic probably put it on pole position. But I'm driving with one hand, my left hand at, about 200 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, boy, this isn't too good. But anyway, about 8 in the evening, the first of the 5 cars came into the pits with the engine misfiring. The engineers examined it. We are finished. They will all break. And we were out by midnight. So next, they said, Herr Redman and Herr Siffert, you go to Sebring and do a 24-hour test for the 12-hour race. So off we go. At 20 hours, the chassis broke. The engineers examined it and they said, this is good. The race is only 12 hours. Guess what happened in the race? All the chassis broke. One was repaired and it finished in 2nd place. So at about that time, I got a call from Rico Steinemann, the team manager, an ex-racing driver, who I think he finished 2nd at Le Mans 1 year. And he lives in Zurich. And he rings, Brian, this is Rico. We would like you to come to Stuttgart, collect a 911R, come to my house in Zurich, and go and practice for the Targa Florio. Wow. And Richard Atwood will do the same. So we arrive in Stuttgart. We're presented with 2 911Rs. We head off to Zurich. We spend the night with Rico and Marianne. And then we fly down the Autostrada, absolutely flat out. These were low-geared rally cars, and they went to about 7.5. We were under 7,000 all the way down the Autostrada. Then we get to Sicily. Of course, we can't find the Targa Florio. We don't know where it is. So we're in Cefalù, and we're asking everybody. And somebody will say, up there is the pit. So we go up there. And then we ask somebody in the pit area, now where do we go? They say, the road goes here to Cefalù, And so we did all that, but it was so time consuming, that we only did about 3 laps a day. It took about an hour to do a lap, of course, and the traffic was terrible. And then in the race, Porsche arrived in strength. I don't remember how many cars, there were at least 4. And Richard had a bit of an off, I think. Something went wrong, so we didn't finish. And then 1970 came, and everything was pretty straightforward. They had 4 cars there, and they were all painted in these exotic, spades and hearts, card things. And race-wise, we only got 1 practice lap on the open track on the Friday. That was the only practice lap that you got in the car. 1 lap. There's 800 corners. It's 44 miles. So, people say to you, oh, you must have learnt the Targa. I said, I didn't have the slightest idea. So all I did, I tried to learn the dangerous corners, the tight ones, or the tight ones followed by a quick bit, or the tight ones or the fast ones that were followed by a very tight bit. And I also looked out for signs that were painted on the road and sometimes on the villages that we went through. We went through 3 villages. And sometimes you'd see a note, Attenzione Vaccarella. They didn't say Vaccarella, it said Nino Vaccarella, a local school teacher. Yeah. So in the race, when I joined in after the first session, Seppi did the first session. When I joined in, we were in, I think, about 3rd or 4th place. But anyway, I caught Vaccarella. And I tried to pass him 3 times, and there was no way he was going to knock me off. So every time, so I thought, So discretion was a better part of all, and I deliberately sat behind him for 2 laps. That's pretty well almost 100 miles, waiting for the pit stop. Because at the pit stop, of course, on the straight, with his 5-litre Ferrari, 512, he could pull out a bit, but not that much. I would think, you know, top speed on the 908.3 was about 165, and on the Ferrari, probably 175 or 80. But there are several corners at the end of the long straight where you're going back up to the pits that I was able to catch up on. And so going into the pits, I was on his tail, and we passed him in the pits, you know, so it wasn't very glorious. And the other thing was, of course, when we crossed the finishing line, in first place, there are thousands of people there. It's jam, not one word, nothing, dead silence.
You weren't supposed to win that one.
I don't think we weren't the popular winner.
Well, Brian,
because
I'm curious about something, because you just won this great Italian road race in a German car, a British driver in a German car, and we always hear how the Tifosi are so crazy about Ferrari, and of course in Italy, like you said, this is supposed to be an Italian win. Is there a similarity in that, like when you're in the Porsche and you win at the Nürburgring, is the crowd the same way for that as the Italians are, or are the Italians just that passionate?
Well, I think the Italians are basically more passionate, because when I've been back 2 years ago to Sicily and do a tour of the track and go to the museums, the enthusiasm is unbelievable. And right here behind me, I've got so many mementos that I was given 2 years ago. They gave us all unbelievable and really good things, you know. So they are incredibly enthusiastic. They are amazing.
But you're also memorialized there, though. There's a tile wall that's still there today. That is a beautiful artwork of your 1970 win. You and your co-driver Siffert.
Yes,
amazing piece of art.
Yes, it's very nice. That was done in one of the third village just before you get back onto the main straight.
I love the story, Brian. I love the story of the year prior where Porsche put you and Richard in these new 911Rs, relatively new cars, and you drive to Sicily. I mean, I just love that story. And you're practicing in these rally prep short geared 911Rs. I mean, that's incredible in itself. It's one of my favorite parts of this whole story of going into the Targa.
Yes. I mean, one great strengths of Porsche ever since the beginning and even now is the great reliability. You know, the care that they take to build the cars. There is nothing like them for the reliable race cars and street cars as well. And so that attention to detail, I think, is amazing. You know, they are, the best production building car in the world, no doubt. Yeah.
And was Rico Steinemann, was he a hands-off team manager at that race? Do you have any insight to what he was doing? Was he kind of was he hands-off management, so to speak?
Great question.
He was. I don't think he was really the team manager so much in 1970, because in late on in '69, with all the dramas with the 917, we'd done this test at the Österreich-Ring, and it was a Porsche test, but it was where the management of the main team from Porsche was done by John Wyer, who I'd driven for 2 years before in '68. And so, Rico Steinemann was pretty well out of it by 1970. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's another long story by itself, because when we got to Daytona for the first race of the new season, with John Wyer as the official entrant, everybody, including John Wyer, was absolutely stunned to see what was really another factory car, entered by Ferdinand Piech's mother, Porsche Austria.
For 1970, John Wyer's Gulf Team 917s were up against Ferrari's new model, the 512S. Much to Wyer's surprise, he also had to contend with 2 more 917s allocated to the Austrian Porsche Salzburg team. The stage was set for an epic season, but some of the fiercest racing was in the Gulf team itself.
The rivalry between Siffert and Rodriguez was tremendous. They were both very, very aggressive drivers. I think maybe Rodriguez was actually a smoother driver and easier on the machinery because Seppi only had one speed. He was flat out.
New Gulf 9083s appeared for the Targa, and the Rodriguez-Siffert battle raged on.
So that was another factory car. And Wire thought he was the only factory car.
Surprise, surprise.
Imagine.
So when the 9083, well, first of all, when the 9083, I mean, what Porsche did in that time was unbelievable. I'm talking about really 69, because here they were racing, you know, they probably had 15 908s in long tail and short tail form. And they were building the 917, 25 917s at the same time. And at the same time, they were building a new car only for the Nürburgring and the Targa Florio, the 9083, based on the Berg Spider. And engineer Manfred Bantley, who got very little recognition for that, he was the leading light behind that. And when we went to Weissach for the Christmas party, celebrating Porsche winning the Manufacturers' Championship for the first time ever, and I don't like to say too much about it, but Jo Siffert and I won 5 of the 10 races and won the championship effectively for Porsche in 69. So we get to Weissach. It's a fairly dark, small area, nothing like today. The engineer says to me, "Herr Redman, you would like to see the new 9083? And he takes me into a dark corner and there's no body on it. I get in it. So I get out, and in England, you know, before the war and during the war, there was a famous airman called Douglas Bader, who lost both his legs below the knee before the war in an airplane accident. He flew Spitfires in the war like that. He was shot down. He was a prisoner of war, etc., etc. So when I got out, the engineers, they were a little bit sheepish about it, because from about halfway down your leg, it was completely in front of the front wheel. Never mind the front axle, you're in front of the front wheel. There's nothing there, a little oil cooler, you know. So I remember, what do you think was the new 9083? I said, I think it's a very good car for Douglas Bader. So they didn't think too much of it. So then I get a call from Weissach, Herr Redman, this is January of 1970. You will come to Weissach and test the new 9083. I said, but it's snowing. This is not a problem. Herr Piech has the answer. So I fly into Stuttgart. I'm met there, it's snowing. And they say, well, Herr Piech has special material from the airport. It is not a problem. So I go to Weissach the next morning. Snow is piled up at the sides. It's been plowed. The surface is wet looking, but it's been treated with material from the airport. So I go out, I do about 3 laps because I haven't been to Weissach before. And the 4th lap, I get on the main straight and I get going, and then I floor it, you know, as you do. I go spinning down the road. I end up in a snowbank. So I jumped out, and when I jumped out, I slid on the ice. And Herr Piech arrived at a van with, you know, 8 or 9 engineers in, and Herr Piech says, Herr Redman, what is the problem? I said, Herr Piech, this is the problem. And I slid on the road. And he said, this is the last time we ever tested Weissach in the winter. So then we have this massive drama I made a foolish move in 1970, you know, having been part of the best long distance team in the world with Porsche, and decided to go to South Africa in 1968. I'd met a gentleman from Johannesburg, and he said to me, come to South Africa, it's a wonderful life, we'll set you up in this business, running a Volkswagen dealership. And so we went. I shipped everything, the house, furniture, the car, my wife and 2 children, but I hated the whole thing. So in March of 71, I was back in England, but no drive. And I started driving for Sid Taylor, a private entrant in the Formula 5000, McLaren. And I got a call from John Wire. Redman, would you like to do the Targa Florio with Siffert in May? Because Bell hasn't done it. Derek had taken my place in the team when I'd retired. And so I said, okay, great. And this looked like a great opportunity, you know, to get back into big time racing. And so we get there. Well, the day before the race, Siffert crashes the car pretty hard. They work all night on it. It's repaired. Go to the start and wires us to me. Redman, I'd like you to start the race. I said, what for? He said, I don't want Siffert and Rodriguez knocking each other off. Because they're always bang, bang. So I started, and, you know, right from the start, the handling wasn't normal. It was, you know, it was odd. The steering wasn't correct. Anyway, I get about 20 miles into the 44-mile circuit, and I turned for a pretty straightforward corner, and the steering broke, and I hit a kilometre stone post right in the fuel tank, which is next to me on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Just before the race, an engineer said to me, Herr Redman? I said, yes. He said, if you must have the accident, do not crash on the right side. So naturally I crashed and it exploded. It exploded. And I was on fire from head to foot, but at the, you know, at the instant of the crash, I hit my safety, and Siffert and I had done 15 driver changes against the clock the previous day. And so I automatically held the release, shut my eyes and held my breath. And I stood up and jumped. I didn't know where I was going, anything. So there was nobody came for 45 minutes. You know, the helicopter couldn't land. So big drama. So then I'm in this place. Nobody knew where I was. And at 10 o'clock that night, Richard Atwood and Pedro Rodriguez came looking for me. And they found me about 10. And they took me back to the hotel where there was a German doctor who gave me painkilling injections. I couldn't see. And I was covered in bandages from one head to toe. So Gulf and Porsche rented a jet out of Geneva. It came and it took me to Manchester. The main burns hospital in England was closed for infection. And I went to a private ward of a big cancer hospital in Manchester. And there I was very lucky again, just, you know, how I'd been lucky with Professor Orban with my arm in 68. I was lucky again because the head of surgery, plastic surgery, was a World War II veteran. And so I had great, you know, great treatment there. But that was that, Targa Florio. And then I went back again, you know, in 73 with Jackie Hicks in the Ferrari, the 312 PB. But I knocked the nose off in practice. And then before the start, I said to him, Jackie, you must remember one thing. He said, what is that? I said, this is not a race. And he crashed on the second lap. So when he got back to the pits, I said, are you okay, Jackie? Yes, thank you, Brian. He said, I am fine. He said, but I have a very interesting accident. He said, I go down the side of a hill a very long way. So that was really, that encapsulates my Targa experience, but I've been back twice since as a tour guide, you know, for Steve Austin's Great Vacations. So,
well, Brian, if I could ask you, because you've said that, you know, you've reasoned that your two big accidents were caused by mechanical failure, and that you always remain confident in your own driving abilities despite that. But what I'm curious about is, how do you not get spooked by the idea that something can break at any moment like that, when, you know, there's really nothing you can do about it, and yet you go back? I mean, this was earlier in your career, and yet you've come back so many times. This was before your 3 Formula 5000 championships, before the GTP championship, before the Group 44, before all the vintage racing, and you always managed to get back. Where does that come from?
Well, of course, I had another accident at the end of the 5000 series, 76. They changed the rules and they made us put bodywork on the open wheel single-seater. And it was a marketing exercise from the SCCA. They wanted the name Can-Am back because Can-Am, it had bigger crowds at the circuits than they did for Formula 5000.
Right.
And so I went out to San Javite in Canada for the first race of the new season in 1977. I'd never seen the car before, but it was a 5000 with bodywork on. And it was prepared by Chaparral, you know, who I'd driven for 4 years, so I knew it was going to be okay. So out I go, and I come in after about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, And Jim Hall said, "How is it?" I said, "It's good." He said, "What do you want, you know, to change the balance?" And I said, "Drop the front wing 1/4 of an inch." And on the next lap, at 170 miles an hour, it took off. So it went straight in the air, about 40 feet, turned over and came down. And the roll bar broke, and that broke my neck. C1 up here, smashed my shoulder, split my breastbone, broke my ribs on the left-hand side, and the ambulance blew a tire on the way to hospital. So that took me about 9 months to recover. But you know, what I found after all these accidents, well, of course, the last one I was unconscious, so I didn't know anything. But there's definitely, you know, there's something in your brain that sends signals out when something bad happens. Because at the time of the accident with my broken arm in '68, I didn't feel anything, you know, at the time. It was like a dream. I was like in a dream. Everything was happening in slow motion. I'm lying on the ground, you know. A corner worker had been badly injured by one of my wheels. 3 wheels had come off the Cooper. I'm lying on the ground, and they put the fire out, and a photographer who I knew, David Phipps, is looking down at me, like, looking down. I'm shouting, "The effing steering, bro!" Yeah. And so, but I wasn't in any pain. And the same with the fire. I mean, actually, at the time, during the fire, I didn't feel anything, nothing at all. So, in thinking about it all afterwards and thinking, well, should I go racing? I thought, well, if something bad happens, you don't know much about it.
Wow.
Ryan, something that is always, you and Jo Siffert are one of the all-time great driving group pairing of drivers. You guys were so dominant together. As someone who knew him closely, what made you guys work so well together as a driving couple, you know, a race couple?
Well, I think, you know, even on the Monday morning at Daytona, Rico Steinanen said to me, "Brian, would you like to be number 1 in your own car and choose your co-driver? Or would you go as number 2 to Jo Siffert?" I knew that if I went as number 2 to Siffert, I'd get none of the plaudits, none of the photographs, but I thought we'd win more races.
Wow.
And that's, we won 5 races. So we, at one point, because there were 6 German drivers, and they were complaining all the time, "Siffert and Redman get the best car." Well, at the Nürburgring, they had 2 new 908s, Flunder, which you know more about than I do, a different shaped body for more top speed. And they were both written off or badly damaged during practice, one by Rick Alford and one by Jo Siffert, which is the car we were supposed to be racing. So Siffert and I got a spare car, a backup car from Porsche Austria, and won in it, you know, and so that stopped a lot of the comments.
He was, I mean, he was that fast. I mean, all the books and the video, the film of him, he was a magician and a tactician driver. I mean, he was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was fantastic. The only trouble with Joe was that he only had 1 speed. That was flat out. Flat out, yeah. You know, and it's that, as much as anything, that cost us Le Mans in 1970. You know, we were leading by 4 laps. 4 laps is 32 miles.
Yeah.
And Jackie Hicks in the factory Ferrari, 512, caught him. It's about 1 in the morning. It's raining. Now they're racing like there's 1 lap to go. And Siffert, first of all, Hicks went off the track and a corner worker was killed. And then Siffert came through the chicane behind 3 slower cars. They're all having their own race. They're side by side pretty well. So he swerves right to the right and comes, and right in front of the Porsche pit, missed a gear. And we all heard the engine go, whoop. Because, you know, the 917, it would go to 8,200 for 40 hours. If it went once to 8.4, it broke, the valve gear broke. So, and it went to a lot more than 8.4.
as happens when you miss a shift, yeah.
Well, of course, you know, that whilst Porsche always insisted on synchromesh gearboxes, it really slowed them down because I would think on, let's say, a track like Le Mans, 8 miles, I would think the synchromesh gearbox cost you at least 1.5 seconds as opposed to a racing crash change gearbox. because you had to be so careful. And in 1970, of course, the original 917 had a 5-speed gearbox. Fifth gear was off to the right and up alongside third. And I'll guarantee you that the first time one was raced at Spa-Francorchamps in 1969 by Gerhard Mitter and Udo Schutz, the Mitter missed a gear on the first lap, because I'll guarantee he went from 4th to 3rd instead of 4th to 5th, which is very easy to do. Very easy to do.
Cam, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just, something you said, Cam, made me think of a conversation we had or with our first guest, Stefan Ortelli, back in the 1998 race. If you think all these years forward from what you're talking about, we had a conversation about the gearbox in the GT198 and a decision that Porsche made to go with the H-pattern gearbox and sort of looking for the reliability versus the speed. And it seems to be a consistency with Norbert Singer along those lines.
Yes, well, they said at the time, Herr Bott, who was head of engineering, said, oh, it's because we must develop the synchromesh for the street car. So can't say much about that. He was very kind. At the end of 69, here he is with 10 drivers, 3 English, 6 Germans, 1 Swiss. He said to me, Brian, you are our favorite driver. I said, thank you very much, Herr Bott. He said, and I think he's going to say, you're so careful, you're so, fast, da, da, da. He said, yes, he said, you are the only one who never complains.
That's pretty good. That's really good.
Well, but Brian, through all your trials and tribulations and your recoveries, you've always managed to maintain a wicked sense of humor. I mean, I love the story about telling trophy queens that they've just kissed your left buttock. And I mean, maybe you want to explain that one.
That's a good one.
Yes, which one?
That you've always told the trophy queens when they gave you a kiss on the cheek that you were actually kissing your left buttock.
Yeah, well, it's not just the trophy queens, it's other, individuals. I still do it today to some degree. I say, oh, thank you very much. You've just kissed my left buttock. So the skin grafting was here, came off my left buttock. When the surgeon, Mr. They don't call them doctor in England, they call them Mr. Surgeons and Mr. Randall Champion. When I, for the first week, they didn't do anything. My hands were burnt and my face and the back of my neck. And they were waiting to see what was going to go on before they actually start. And he had an assistant, a young guy. And as you go through life, you meet, 1 or 2 people that you instantly don't get on with. Well, his assistant, the minute we saw each other, we hated each other, So a week goes by and Mr. Champion says, right, he said, we'll start operating tomorrow. I said, what are you going to do? Well, he said, we're going to remove some skin from your buttocks and beneath your arms and behind your ears. And I said, how do you get it off the buttocks? He said, have you ever seen a wood plane? I said, yeah, something like that. So he said to his assistant, clean Mr. Redman up. Well, at that point, I'm covered in some protective grease all over my face, all over my hands, all over the back of my neck. And Mr. Champion goes out of the room and this guy says, sit there. So I sat on this chair and he gets alcohol and cotton wool and scrubbed my face, my hands and my neck. And I sat there. And when he went out, I was down on the floor doing push-ups. And my Scottish nursing sister came in. She said, Mr. Redman, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to take my mind off other things. But when I came around from the anaesthetic after removing the skin, I thought they'd cut my leg off. I mean, it was unbelievable. There was blood right to the end of the bed. So after a week, the nursing sister says, all right, Mr. Redman, it's time to remove the dressing. Well, it's like wood. It's as hard as wood. It's like this. So I said, you're going to put me under? No, whip it off. Oh, no. We put you in a hot bath and remove it slowly. I said, okay, you can put me in the hot bath and I will remove it. Which I did. It took me a day. So.
Brian, I have a question for you. You've ran all the incredible crown jewel races over the history of automobile. Of course, the Targa, Nürburgring 1000, Spa 1000, Le Mans. I'm talking mostly about the European races. If you could run one of those again one last time, which one would you race? I mean, obviously Le Mans, it has a special place in the crown, but these other races, Nuremberg and Spa are just as difficult in different ways. And which one of those races would you run one last time?
Well, Le Mans is the crown in the jewel, really. It's the only one that everybody, the general public, know about. And I led it 4 times, and yet never well, finished twice in 935s in Dick Barber, 935s in 78 with John Paul Sr., and in 80 with John Fitzpatrick and Dick. We were 5th overall and 1st in the IMSA class. And really, we could have won in 80, but it went on to 5 cylinders about 4 in the morning. It was funny there because it was raining again, it was miserable. It was miserable. And I came in at about 5 or 6 in the morning. Of course, it's light. And Dick Barber gets in and out he goes. And as usual, you wait for a lap, to see everything's okay before moving. I was wet through and cold. And through the rain, I see the car coming in the pits and this hand waving through the windshield. So I rush round to the outside and to the driver's door. Dick says, "Brian," he said, "you guys are paid to drive in conditions like this. Get back in."
That's great. That's a good Dick Barber story.
When I first started driving for him, he told me never touch the boost, 1.2 bar.
Right.
So at Road America, I couldn't understand why I was qualifying 8th, 9th. So I said to Rolf Stommelen, who was an expert, there were certain people who really knew how to play with the boost. John Fitzpatrick, Rolf Stommelen, Bob Wallach, they were real, they played it like a piano. So I said to Rolf at Road America, I said, "Rolf, can I ask you a question?" "Yeah, Brian, what is it?" I said, "Do you ever touch the boost during qualifying?" And he puts his hand on his hips and he looks at me and he says, "Brian, do I ever touch the boost? I turn it as far as it will go." So after that, I got a bit better. So, I managed to win 5 times at Spa, and so I thought Jackie Stewart always said the Nürburgring was the most difficult track. I didn't think so. I won 3 times at the Nürburgring, but the Nürburgring, yes, it was difficult. 170 corners and 14 and a half miles. But once you knew it, which I did, I knew it. Spa was just speed, it was so fast. The kink in the Master Straight was about 1.5 miles before the kink. And then you went through this farmyard, left, right, and it's blind. I mean, you couldn't see through it. Right. And then there's about 1.5 miles after the kink to the corner Stavelot. And coming into the kink in the 917, we were doing 210 miles an hour and going through the kink at about 180. And the lowest speed round Stavelot, which is a long corner, was 170. I mean, the average speed for the race was 149 point something. And the fastest single lap was Pedro Rodriguez at an average of 160 point something. You were on 200 miles an hour. In practice in 1970, when Siffert went out, he didn't come back on that. Rodriguez comes in. Siffert is stopped at the side of the track, flat tire. So they send out a wheel and a tire and a jack and a wheel brace. They change it at the side of the track. He comes back in, they change 4 tires. It does it again. It comes back in again. Now they change them again. Now, Herr Redman, it is your turn. I said, but there's something the matter. Go slowly. So off I go. The 4th lap, I'm flat out. So I go down the Master Straight through the kink, round Stavelot. Now I'm on the uphill, slightly uphill, return straight. The speed is about 180 miles an hour. The corner, first corner, is blind to the right, and it's followed by blind to the left. And I turn into the right, and I went sideways. My left rear tire came off the rim. And I go sideways up the road, and then it starts switching from side to side. And I'd lost feeling of where I was counter steering. And I'd read in a racing book that if in circumstances like that, you let go of the steering wheel, the Ackerman in the steering would send it straight. And that's what happened. I let go of the wheel and it went straight. And I got back into the pits Siffert fell on the floor laughing. I said, what's the matter with you? He said, Brian, you're the color of your overalls. Of course, after the race, which we won, as I mentioned, at the fastest road race ever run up to that time, I'm there with Marion, my wife, and son James.
Wow.
So at about 10:30, when the boring prize giving is over, Siffert said, Brian, we go and have a drink with the mechanics. I said, oh, great. So I go to Marion. I said, I'll take you back to the hotel and then I'm going for a drink with the mechanics. What time will you be back? I said, midnight. Well, at 4 a.m., back we come. Siffert's doing spin turns in the gravel. We're showering all the hotel windows with gravel. We can't walk up the stairs. We crawl up the stairs. The hotel manager is called. Marion wouldn't let me in. I get dumped in water. It's a long story. I won't bore you with it. But Porsche were banned from the hotel.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, there's probably just more stories like that one where that came from. But yes, you do raise a point that I am curious about, though, when you talked about going back to something you read in a book as far as how to react in a situation. And I'm curious because, we often, we get to talk to you and, you're our hero in a racing, these accomplishments that you've created and you're in this elite group of athletes from this golden era of motorsport. But when you were racing, did you look back? Were there people that you looked at and said, that's who I want to drive like, that's who I want to emulate? I'm not sure I know who your heroes were.
Well, when I started racing in '59 in the Morris 1000 Travelers Car, my hero at that time was Jim Clark. Mm-hmm. And he raced in some of the races that I was in, not in the same race, at the same track, mm-hmm. with the Acura Cos, D-type Jaguars and Togero GT. And I got to know Jim later in 1967, because when I turned professional for £30 a week, it was for Formula 2. So I was doing Formula 2 in a Lola T100, and Jimmy and all the top drivers were doing Formula 2 at that time. So I got to know him. The ugly question of exercise was just starting to rear its ugly head at that time. And one day I said to Jimmy, Jimmy, do you do any exercise? He said, okay, laddie. He said, exercise every day. I said, you do? He said, okay, I lift my leg to get into bed at night. So I've practiced that ever since. It's done very well for me. And then he also, at the same race meeting in France, he started the first food fight that I ever saw. And so we're at this nice restaurant and everybody's dressed with ties, and everything after the race on Sunday night. And dinner was pretty well finished. And he picked a knife up and he put a butter pat on it. And he went, boom, like this. And I watched as this butter pat flew across the room and it landed right between the eyes of a very nice young lady. And that started it. Everybody picked up bread rolls and we talk about chaos. That was my first one.
Sounds like there were more after that. Yeah, the first of many, perhaps.
Yes, it was, because in those days nobody flew back after the race. You couldn't. Nobody was. Right. It's completely different. You all partied big time on Sunday night. And also from a similar race in France, an English guy, Chris Irwin, said to me, Brian, how are you getting back to the UK? I said, well, British Airways, tomorrow. And he said, I've got my plane here. Would you like a ride back? So I said, oh, great. So we get this little single engine. We fly over France. It's a beautiful day. We're pretty low. We see wonderful. So then we get over the English Channel and we're in low cloud fog. You can't see a thing. And I'm feeling a bit nervous. And I said to Chris, I said, you've got instrument, rating, that sort of thing? Oh, no, he said, but I know how it works. And just as he said that, the engine stopped. And my heart went bang. I've never heard it like that since. Anyway, it had run out of fuel on the wingtip tanks and he switched it back and it started up again. But boy, a lot of people died in small planes in those days,
Yeah, well, it's crazy to think about the statistics of drivers that died alone at Spa. And of course, as Ray mentioned, this is the golden era of racing, but also one of the most dangerous eras of racing. And just in Spa alone, 28 drivers died in the span of almost 2 years. And that's a crazy statistic. I mean, of course, and talking about your injuries and getting back in the race car, it's just mind boggling. And when we watch racing and the collisions that happen and the accidents and people walk away, it's amazing that you're with us, Brian. I mean,
yeah, just, you know, you've got to put it down to luck, don't you? Why do certain things happen? You know, so I've been, you know, extremely lucky. I don't actually have any anything from all those accidents. I don't have any aches in joints. I don't have anything.
that's crazy.
Unbelievable. And about, you know, David Hobbs is a friend of mine, and he has a house here in Vero Beach. And 3 or 4 years ago, we were at dinner one night, and I said, you know, when I was at Spa, every time I was there, I thought, boy, tomorrow I'm dead. You know, on Saturday nights when I'm going to sleep. He looked at me and amazed me. He said, what? I said, yeah. He said, I'd have never got in the car if I thought that. So, anyway.
Did you, as a driver, when you're turning your laps, were you talking to yourself? I mean, some drivers do that. They talk themselves through the corners. What was going through your mind? How did you handle just corner after corner? I mean, you know, you even said in your book, you know, at the Targa Florio in 1970, I mean, you do 11 laps, it's 500 miles, nearly 8,000 corners between the two of you. And you said, and Siffert said that neither one of you put a wheel wrong the entire time. I mean, how do you master those mental skills that allow you to operate in this zone of opposites where you're channeling your aggression while you're calming your survival instincts, this, you know, this ability to be able to power up and down as needed? Where does that come from?
Well, I think all my life, really, I go through the race wherever I am. I go through the track at night. I go to sleep thinking about the corners and about the gear changes. And even if I lost the rev counter during the race, it wouldn't matter because I know I'm changing gear in the sound end. So I did that all the time. Also, early on, I started thinking every night before I go to sleep, I'd think, locked brakes, off the brake, locked brakes, off the brake. Because one of the most dangerous things in a racing car is you lock the wheels and you see something coming at you and you're mentally not prepared to come off the brake. So that saved me several times, including on the Targa Florio in practice one time. And also a jammed throttle, which in those days was really a danger. I had 6 jammed throttles during my career. And the first one was at Montlhéry, Paris, 1,000 kilometers in 1969 in a Matra. I drove a Matra with Pedro Rodriguez. And about my second or third lap, I'm at the end of the main straight. I'm going 170 miles an hour. There's a left-hand corner coming up. I come off the throttle. Nothing happens. And of course, the whole inclination is to try and brake, which is completely hopeless. And so I didn't know where the switches were or anything. So I just declutched. And it had a rev limiter on it. It just went on the rev limiter. Bop, 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 bop. And I didn't crash. And so every night before I went to sleep, I'd say locked brakes, off the brake. And I'd say jammed throttle, declutch, jammed throttle, declutch. And it saved me 5 more times. Yeah, I think. So,
that's fascinating.
But in terms of on the track itself, no, I never talked to myself about, you know, what was coming up. No. In Targa Florio, I think a lot of the corners are about the same speed. And so, you know, if you try and get some kind of memory for the really bad bits, that's what I used to try and do. That's what I did at the Nürburgring, first of all. Try and remember the really bad bits. There was one bit at the Nürburgring, you probably know it, where you go down the Fox Run, downhill.
Yeah.
And then you go uphill through a fast right-hander. And the next one after that is a blind left-hander that's tight. You know the one? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in 1969, I said to Jo Siffert after Saturday practice, can we do a lap in the 911? I'd like, you know, because I'd only raced there once. And so round we go. Well, at that corner, as we come round, you know, you're around the left-hand, there's all cars parked on the left, and there's about a dozen lederhose-clad gentlemen standing on the hedge. There were no barriers, you know, it's on the hedge.
Right.
And so we joined them. We wondered what they were doing. And Jo Siffert, what do you think they're here for? And the next minute, we heard this terrible squealing of brakes and locked tires. And the Volkswagen goes straight on at that left-hander, through the hedge, and rolling down the hill.
Huh.
These guys are all standing there. Ho, ho, ho. I mean, every race weekend at the Nürburgring, about 5 spectators died having accidents.
That's
I mean,
crazy.
It sounds unbelievable. That's the way it was.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see the videos and the, well, not videos and mostly photographs of the Targa Florio, and there you are. Well, here it is on the cover of your book. I mean, you're apexing these corners, and you've got people that are basically standing where there would be guardrails. We talk about Group B rally racing in the 1980s as this sort of insane event. But yet here you were in these prototype cars on public roads lined with people going through cities and right down along stone walls and buildings and people. I mean, I imagine people are still crossing the roads at time, not aware of what's coming, but nevertheless, they've got to get across the road.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, people cross the roads. And of course, you went through 3 villages with a lot of people each side of the road. But what do you do? It's the way that it was. And you just kind of hope that nothing goes wrong. What else can you do?
Wow. I tell you, well, tell us, if before we finish up our hour, I'm curious how things are for you today and what you're working on. Can you tell us what the WeatherTech International Challenge at Road America is and what it's all about?
It's on. It's in 2 weeks, and but now I'm getting pressure from my wife about this, the whole COVID-19 thing, and she says if I go, I have to come back and isolate somewhere else, not at this condo, for 14 days. So I'm still thinking about it. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, we haven't really done. We were lucky to get our Targa 66 club event in February this year.
Yeah.
And the Amelia Island in March. They were very lucky as well to get that in before it all broke out. So.
I don't think a lot of folks know, and Cam, I know you're well aware of this, but when it comes to race promoting and events, you, along with PCNA's Bob Carlson, really created what we know as today as the Rennsport reunions. Started out, I remember, as the double 50 of Watkins Glen sort of grew out of your intercontinental events that you did. So, I mean, we love Rennsport reunion. In fact, I'm wearing one of the shirts today. But how did that whole idea come about in the conversation with you and Bob?
Well, in March of 1998. March of 1998, I get a call from Bob. Could I go to Sebring and test the 5 cars coming from Weissach, from the museum, that were going to go to Laguna Seca in August? So I go to Sebring, and Klaus Bischoff at that time was the head of the museum. So I drive the cars, and after I'd driven the 908-3, I said to him, remember, Klaus, how in 1970 Jo Siffert and I were leading and it ran out of oil, and Vic Elford and Kurt Ahrens won. We were driving, of course, for Porsche Austria. He says, yeah, Brian, he said, in Porsche Austria, we know about this oil problem. We have bigger tanks.
That's great.
Oh, thank you very much, Klaus. So, anyway, Bob, after doing I think I wrote an article for Road and Track on it, and then I called Bob and I said, Bob, if you'll send those 5 cars to Watkins Glen after Laguna Seca in early September, I'll put on an all Porsche race. So that's what happened. We had a great event. We had a good turnout. I mean, the usual disasters. My registrar, Susan Wright, she called me on the Sunday before, and she was due to go there on Tuesday. She's crying. She's like, my daddy's poorly. I can't go. She was the only one who knew everything about all the registrations. And we opened registration on Wednesday, and we had 6 volunteers who didn't know anything either. But they all did a fantastic job, and we had a great meeting. And so after that, probably 6 months afterwards, Bob called, and he said, can we do another one, this time at Lime Rock? And we'll call it Rennsport 1. So that's what happened. And this time, Porsche did much more in terms of bringing drivers in and doing publicity and everything else. And then after that, he said, let's do another one at Daytona. Mm-hmm. And so we finished up doing 2 at Daytona. And I think the last one in 2007, we had a tremendous 917 turnout, something like 17 cars, I think. But all the dramas of organizing these things, I mean, you know, cars were stuck in a boat in Savannah and we couldn't get them out of customs. 3 917s, and they came finally on Saturday afternoon. You know, it's like all this time it's driving me absolutely crazy. So.
What a great story.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Gosh, and you know, your book, I know you recount a lot of the great stories and things. I know we've only touched on a short bit of it today. And, you know, that's, again, when we talk about going down deep tracks of Porsche history, we just figure, you know what, let's just do it again. We'll just talk about a different topic and we can dive back into it. But, you know, I've got to say, you know, I really appreciate you being here. I know Cam does as well, because, you know, driving down this deep track of the Targa Florio with you, you know, I was born in 1970, and while I was too young to ever experience the Targa, while I was too young to ever experience it personally, I'm happy to know that I entered a world where something like that could even exist. So for Cam and I, you know, getting to know you is the same as claiming that we have one of history's valiant gladiators as our friend.
100%.
So,
well said, Ray. That's perfectly stated.
Well, thank you
summarize
very
it
much.
better.
Oh, my phone's ringing. I'll turn it up.
thanks.
Before we start.
Man in demand.
Yeah.
Not really.
For sure.
No.
But I greatly appreciate all the time you've spent with us. I know folks that are watching, if they want to read more, they can go to your website, gorace.com, and find a copy of your book that you'll personalize, I'm sure. Daring Drivers and Deadly Tracks.
It's an awesome book.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. It wasn't easy. Jim Mullen, he wanted to do the book. I didn't really want to do a book, but anyway, he did. But it wasn't all plain sailing, but the book's done very well. It was the Royal Automobile Club Motoring Book of the Year in 2016, and it's now sold about 7,000 copies, which is pretty good for a specialist type of book. Yeah.
That's excellent.
Good.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. Ray, thank you for hosting us. As always, you're the consummate navigator through all these questions. So, gentlemen, it's been a real honor today.
Thanks very much. Glad it worked out. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Well, Ray, how about that? I mean, spending an hour with Brian Redman, you always say it's one thing to meet your heroes, but actually spend time with them and connect with them. I mean, what an inspirational story. What an inspirational man. The mental toughness. What I take away from that interview is the mental toughness that guy has and had and exhibited time and time again, getting back in the race car after all those accidents and tragedies. I mean, geez. Yeah. I mean, what was your takeaway from the interview?
You know, I really appreciated the opportunity to talk with Brian and to sort of find out, curious about the mindset of when you're doing corner by corner, lap by lap. How does a legend like him approach the driving style? And for me, that was a great takeaway. Just an amazing opportunity to do this. Thank you so much for putting this all together and making this possible. The Fresh Brewed and Air Cooled Deep Tracks has just been a wonderful opportunity, like you said, to get to know our heroes. And so I say we keep doing it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, what a better way to spend an hour. I mean, incredible. I pinch myself. We're really fortunate to get to do this with these wonderful individuals and just rewarding experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if you enjoyed watching this as well, then please, if you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share the video. Let others know about it so we can continue to bring them and do more for you. It's great to know that folks out there enjoy it and appreciate it. So thank you for your time and viewing, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Ray, thanks so much. Thanks to Porsche Classic, Ray Schaefer, and all of our Road Scholars fans. Everybody, see you next time.
Thanks, Cam.
Bye-bye.